Welcome to the Geeky Brummie podcast. Joining me today, Mr. Keith Bloomfield.
Hello.
Mr. Sam Edwards.
Hello.
And myself, Mr. Ryan Parish. It's a Halloween-ish edition of the Geeky Brummie podcast. Join us. We'll be talking all about our favourite Halloween films, some of the highest-grossing horror. That was a horrible sentence to get out.
Horror film.
Highest-grossing horror films of all time, and we were talking about what makes a scary franchise an actual franchise. What makes a horror film franchise a horror film franchise? There's been quite a few recent-ish franchises, shall we say, which are kind of not a franchise, but a franchise. Sam, Conjuring, I know you're a fan of those films.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm a fan of those films. I'm aware of those films. So Conjuring, I think it's quite cleverly tried to get away from the sort of endless sequels of something like Halloween, but in a way that still allows it to release endless films by having its first film establish a whole range of sort of ghosty, demon-y characters.
Yeah.
And then have a load of spin-offs that give you the backstory of those monsters. So there's the 3 Conjuring films, but then there's also, I think, been 3 Annabelle films and a couple of films about the nun.
Which must say, worst named horror film character of all time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very creepy nun. I haven't seen either of the nun films, I must admit, but so it's almost creating its own little cinematic universe, basically. So I would say that's more of a franchise in a way than something like Saw, where it's a film with lots of sequels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we've had quite a lot of examples of where you've had franchises. You mentioned Saw, where like Jigsaw dies halfway through the franchise and then they still carry on. I mean, we've seen it with Child's Play, I think, where Chucky gets replaced at halfway through the franchise and now he's back in it. Friday the 13th, a particular example, Jason seems to just be unkillable. And then you've got Halloween, which is kind of varied, but Halloween took a diversion quite early in its franchise with Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. I mean, I think it's one of the better Halloween movies, but it doesn't have Michael Myers in it. I mean, Keith, what's your thoughts on Halloween as a franchise?
Obviously, I love the original because it kind of set the tone for what would develop into the slasher genre. Mm-hmm. I love Halloween 3 Season of the Witch because that was the first Halloween film I saw at the cinema, but also because it was so weird and different and has one of the spookiest songs that can ever be heard in it. It's really great. And I loved it because it was very much of its time, very much an 80s movie. But I think for me, a franchise has to at least have some continuance of the story in it. I think a lot of these kind of franchise movies just play on the name. So they call themselves a Friday the 13th or a Halloween, but they're kind of just approximations of that scenario and don't really continue any of the kind of stories. And that's what's happened with the Halloweens. They kind of rebooted it. So I think once you reboot it, it becomes a separate thing. Even though it's using the same kind of premise, it's not carrying on. Mm-hmm. And I think once you start doing that, it doesn't become, I suppose it's just that it's a sellable name. You know, people are going to come and see a Halloween film or a Friday the 13th or a Nightmare on Elm Street film.
Yeah.
So it's got cachet as a name. And I think that's what the studios like to do and keep those franchises going purely because they can sell you anything under that name. I mean, I've recently seen Evil Dead Rise, which in effect is supposedly a continuation of the first 3, the Sam Raimi ones, rather than the reboot that was done in 2013.
Because I think they're all officially allowed, because in the first Evil Dead they said there were 3 different Necronomicons, so they're classing Sam Raimi's original trilogy as Necronomicon number 1. The reboot is Necronomicon number 2, and this Evil Dead Rise new franchise is Necronomicon number 3.
Possibly.
So I think that's the way they've been getting around it, and they're all still officially in the same universe, but they're all
But I think
separate as such.
what you have is that you have diminishing returns, because there's moments in Rise which are kind of like, you go, that's kind of cool, but it doesn't have the same effect as the original Evil Dead trilogy, which really works. Same with kind of like the original Friday the 13th or the Halloweens or whatever it is. The newer iterations don't really have the same impact anymore. And I think that's probably where something like The Conjuring at least is trying to do something new, but even then The Conjuring's still doing things like Amityville Horror.
Yeah.
You know, all of these stories in some way, particularly things like The Nun and Annabelle, are all based on like the Enfield haunting and similar kind of kind of real events that happen. So it's whether it's kind of, again, you've got the difference between horror and paranormal and sci-fi horror and slasher, and so it's kind of a mixed
I think
arena.
Exorcist is a great example of that. I think Blumhouse bought the rights for that, and the guy who made the terrible Halloween reboot, I can't remember what his name is, terrible
You're
director.
probably thinking about Rob Zombie.
Not Rob Zombie, the ones after that. It was, what's his face? Oh, God, I'm going to go out of my head. Halloween Kills, the guy who directed that.
Oh, yeah.
He also did Pineapple Express. Because that's the continuation you want to see in someone's career, where they move from stoner movies into horror films. But Blumhouse had bought the Exorcist rights. William Friedkin was not very happy at all when he heard about it, I think, especially the guy from the Pineapple Express, messing with his magnum opus, basically. But they've already confirmed 3 films, and they've released The Exorcist recent one, which I can't remember
Believer.
what it's called.
It's Exorcist
Yeah, Believer.
Yeah, I think that's a definite case of trading on the name, really, more than anything else. I'd rather see more people like Jordan Peele,
Yeah.
who are kind of just doing modern kind of horror or horror adjacent kind of things.
Do you think even Jordan Peele's getting minimal returns now? Because we had Get Out, which was fantastic. I really loved that. And then you had Us, which was, again, one of the better ones, probably not as popular as Get Out. And then the most recent one, which the name is
Nope.
Nope.
I love Nope.
I
thought
really
that was
loved
fantastic.
Nope, but it hasn't performed at the box office anywhere near the way that Get Out and Us did.
No.
But I think that's a shame, because there's no particular reason for it. It is a fantastic film.
It was the film that I thought should have won the sound Oscars last year, because I thought the sound in Nope was phenomenal.
Yeah, really chilling.
It was absolutely brilliant. The sound editing and the sound on that film was fantastic. So
I do think the scenes with the chimp in that, without wanting to say too much for anyone who hasn't seen it, but they're some of the scariest scenes I've seen in the cinema in a long time.
Yeah. But is that kind of the problem, is horror films have never been well regarded by awards, and they've always kind of been boxed off into their little kind of schlocky horror element. I mean, and the problem is you get stuff like Resident Evil franchise, which has continued far beyond anybody hoped it would. I think, apart from maybe Paul Verhoeven and Mila Jovovich, his bank accounts. But
It's a problem most genres have, I think, when it comes to awards season.
yeah.
The Oscars, like their big dramas, it takes a really, really big genre film like Lord of the Rings or something to break through that.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, so we had the Dark Universe from Universal, which was supposed to be kicked off with the Tom Cruise Mummy film, which had the worst trailer of all time, where they forgot to actually add the sound effects in, I think, and the music to it. If you remember that when that was released, but that just completely died a death, because it was supposed to be 10 or 15 different horror movies based off the back of that Mummy reboot.
Yeah, they did The Invisible Man, which was originally meant to be part of that, but then when the cinematic universe wasn't really working, they just let it be its own thing, and that was great as well, actually.
Yeah. But I think the problem is for modern audiences, especially with The Mummy as a franchise, it's not a horror film anymore. Everybody remembers it more from the Brendan Fraser series of movies than Stephen Sommers, where it's kind of those kind of Mummy Returns, which were more action movies with a little bit of hokey horror elements to a certain extent in there.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem we've got with the whole Universal side of things, is because when those movies originated, and they would be considered horror films, and I'm a big fan of that Universal era. So your Draculas, your Wolfmans, your Black Lagoon, all of those. But they're so of their time that it's difficult to make those horrific in modern terms. I mean, you've had kind of Jack Nicholson attempt it, you've had The Wolfman more recently as well. And it's kind of like, apart from something like American Werewolf in London or Dog Soldiers, the werewolf movie kind of it's become part of that one where you've got films that they now play more towards the comedy side of things. It's more that it's played for laughs rather than for horror. And I can't think of a really good Wolfman werewolf movie. I did see one recently, which was okay, but again, it was played for laughs. There was a lot of comedy actors in it, and it's kind of like, well, is that where horror's got to now? Is that they can't play it fully for shocks because the audience just don't want to be scared that much, so they play it for laughs. And because that's what happened with Sam Raimi when he started to take the Evil Dead trilogy more towards the kind of slightly comedy side of things. Is that what people expect from horror now? Is that it's always tinged with a bit of humour?
Bringing up Sam Raimi is a perfect segue, because the last Doctor Strange movie, which is probably, some people would say, is a horror film as such, because it has the Sam Raimi elements into it, and it is quite dark in certain places, especially with the Scarlet Witch storyline. But that still played very safely with what was quite horrific scenes in it. If you think about the whole, when she's facing off against the Scarlet Witch versus the Illuminati scene, that's quite a horrific segment of events. But it seems to be more, horror now seems to live better on TV and streaming services more than anything else. I mean, we've seen quite a resurgence, especially on Netflix. They've had the Sabrina series and the Riverdale series and spin-offs of those.
Wednesday
is, again, is that a horror film?
Well, no, it's not, but I was just thinking that when you were talking about the werewolf films, because werewolves have almost become like a character type rather than a horror movie monster.
Yeah.
Like you get stuff like Wednesday or Harry Potter or Twilight, where the werewolves are a community, and vampires have the same sort of thing. It's people are more interested in learning about the kind of the mythos behind that group of characters within the film than they are about actually seeing it as a monster.
Yeah.
And I suppose that has its roots in the Universal films that did give them a bit more personality and more of a character than you get with a lot of modern horror movie villains. But I mean, I think horror's always bubbled away under the surface at the cinema. It's always kind of, there's always going to be a horror film out at Halloween because it's easy money for a studio, and usually they're made quite cheaply nowadays as well. Small cast, small location, easy to get around, quick way of doing it. But I think services such as like Shudder has really come into the fore, where it's kind of capitalised on something of taking over horror as its genre. If you want to go to horror, 9 times out of 10 it's on Shudder now, whereas you wouldn't find it normally on other streaming services, except for like, does Flanderized work for kind of horror films that are no longer horror? It's kind of, you've taken the elements of the horror and then taken the actual scary stuff away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the thing, is that you get stuff that's creepy and then you get stuff that's horrific. And it's whether you're going to go for that, a lot of where horror went quite prominently in the kind of late 90s and early 2000s was the kind of gore thing. It was all about seeing something.
Like the Final Destination franchise.
Taboo.
Yeah.
Whereas I've always kind of gone towards the kind of creepy side or the kind of monstery side. So I kind of like things like Cabin in the Woods, where you got that kind of monster thing.
Yeah.
And then it was the creepiness of those things chasing you. And some high concept stuff as well I've quite liked, although they've not ended up as good as I would like. Things like It Follows, where the idea is quite creepy, that there's this thing. And I kind of like, that's why I like monsters like zombies or aliens, when there's kind of not a way of rationalising or reasoning with whatever it is, that this thing that will just keep coming and it will get you and you can't reason with it, and it's just that I find that quite terrifying, the idea of something other that you just cannot
Yeah.
rationalise with. And the thing with your werewolves and your vampires nowadays is that they're quite chatty.
Yeah.
And
It's
you
a
can
tr-
kind of
they
talk
are.
about it. You can kind of talk to them, and there's not that relentless kind of feeling of
They
like,
are just
oh my
tropes
gosh, they are
themselves.
just going to come and get me.
But going back to like the peak of horror, late 70s, early 80s, when we had Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, even they have become archetypes themselves. So like Halloween is the atypical slasher movie, Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th is the killer that never stops. You run him over, you put an axe in his head, he'll still get up and keep chasing you. And then Freddy's just became a joke towards the end. I mean, especially with kind of stuff like Freddy versus Jason, which was just the death knell of both of those franchises to a certain extent. But then we've seen attempts to try and get that series back and try and reboot it. So, for example, the Jackie Earle Haley reboot of Nightmare on Elm Street. We've had Halloween rebooted twice, once with Rob Zombie, then the second run, which was kind of bringing Jamie Lee Curtis back to kind of legitimise it, same as they just did with the recent Halloween Exorcist Believer movie. They brought some of the original cast back to try and legitimise this soft reboot. But do you think it's just lost its sting, those kind of 80s gore fests?
I think they struggle to do anything original because there's been so many films in those genres, even just within those series.
Yeah.
And there's only so many things you can do with a guy that walks around with a knife and can take a hit.
But if you think about some of the directors who started off in horror and then have gone on to other things, so like Guillermo del Toro, especially Peter Jackson started very much in kind of those body horror, Paul Verhoeven, very kind of gruesome stuff, David Cronenberg, and then they've moved into other things now. There doesn't seem to be that new generation of maybe apart from Jordan Peele who've come out of that. I mean, we had M. Night Shyamalan, who just, it's a scary, not a horror movie. It's got some jump scares in it, and there'll be a twist. And that's what he got known for.
Yeah, I wouldn't say his is necessarily horror. I'd say Ari Aster, who directed Midsummer and Hereditary.
And you've got Eggers, The Witch, The Lighthouse,
Yes,
stuff like that. So I think there are people, and Ben Wheatley, to a certain extent, has done it. I think there's people there doing stuff, and I think there's always room for that kind of low budget, creepy movie, and I think they're always going to come through because, like you said, it's a way in for filmmakers because it is something. If you've got a good script and you've got a good idea, it is a cheap movie to make.
Apart from all the corn syrup.
Yeah. So I think horror is always going to be a gateway for filmmakers who then come on to do bigger and better things. Because in some ways you could say, James Cameron started off with Roger Corman doing things like Piranha. The Terminator, in some ways, is still
I would class that as a sci-fi horror film.
Yeah, because of that relentless creature that is coming to get you.
Yeah.
So, if we think of all the big directors, even Spielberg, you could say,
Jaws.
started off with Duel
And
then Jaws.
Yeah.
And so, there's somewhere in the kind of makeup of all the great filmmakers, somewhere, they start off with the low budget, horror-esque kind of films. And it's a way for people to learn their craft, because to make a horror film work, it's like comedy. People poo-poo comedy and horror when it comes to awards things. They always think about drama. But it's really difficult to make a horror film or a comedy work from the point of view of the script and the direction and the rest of it. So it is really tricky. So if you can do that, you kind of, you've got a good career ahead of you.
Well, the whole point of both those franchises is about subverting expectations, and comedy goes on to the surprised, happy subversion, whereas horror goes into the darker, not happy subversion of expectations. That's kind of the horror films that work the best are the ones which actually don't follow the rules to a certain extent.
I guess that's why as well that horror and comedy
merge
so easily.
Yeah.
So, I've always thought the best comedies are the ones that will sort of upset you a bit as well. Like, my favourite episodes of Futurama, for example, are the ones where, like with Fry's dog or Fry's brother, where there's it pulls at your heartstrings, but that just offsets the comedy in a really lovely way.
Yeah.
And horror's same sort of thing. if there's a tiny, you don't want loads of comedy, but you want just enough that will make you kind of warm to the characters and care about what happens to them.
Or have a break. Yeah.
Well, yes, that as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
break the tension up a bit. And then,
But we've seen quite a few of the franchises we mentioned before. Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play have gone completely moved to that comedy side of the aspects, and still horrific in its content, but in a kind of jokey way to a certain extent.
yeah, I think with any horror film, so much of the horror comes in how it's made rather than just what it's presenting. The best horror films, and Halloween is a great example of that, but it has things like kind of blue lighting and chiaroscuro effects, lots of off-screen space, and that sort of thing is what makes them creepy. And you could have a film where you never see a monster once, but use those techniques to give it that kind of spine-tingling effect.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about Alien, which is probably the first proper sci-fi horror film, you don't see the alien for 90% of the movie, and that same for Predator as well, until the end, which again kind of fits in that 80s sci-fi horror genre, subgenre that got formed.
Well, I think one of the prime examples is Robert Wise's Haunting of Hill House, which is one of the creepiest films you can ever watch, yet you don't see nothing throughout the whole thing. You know, it's all done like you said, and I think that's why it works so well, is because you can bring that back into the real world. It's unlikely you're going to walk into a vampire or a werewolf, but the sense of a shadow or a sense of unease, you can bring that back into your house when you get home and the lights are off. You can think, I don't like this. This is a bit weird. So you can kind of, that visceral sense of unease is something that can be easily translated to your own life.
Mm-hmm. Definitely less is more is probably a way to... So I thought I'd take a look at Wikipedia's list of the highest grossing horror films of all time. And there's some here which I think are for debate whether they are horror films or not.
Okay.
So I thought it'd be interesting to go for the top 20 and just see what our thoughts are. And we'll go biggest to 20th. So number 1, It.
That's definitely a horror
Definitely
film.
a horror film. Definitely a horror film.
I'm
This is
assuming
the
it's
2017 version, not the Tim Curry version.
Yeah. Okay.
Not the TV movie, which was then recut into a film. But yeah, it's the 2017 version. It doesn't have It Part 2, weirdly, just It itself.
That's interesting, because usually a sequel financially would do a lot better because people want to see how it finishes.
But worldwide gross $700 million, and 702 roughly, 2017 release. So, not too bad.
Yeah.
All right, number 2, The Sixth Sense. M. Night Shyamalan.
So, it sort of is a horror film. It has ghosts. It relies on the fact that ghosts are inherently creepy, but then also subverts your expectations, like you were saying before.
Yeah.
By establishing that ghosts are inherently creepy, but then suddenly, this one wasn't all along.
Yeah.
I'd say it was a chiller, but not
Yeah.
a horror movie.
Yeah.
In this,
Yeah. So it's an outright horror film as such.
You're not going to get any nightmares from it.
No. Number 3, gross box office, that was $672.8 million. 1999, so
That's pretty
It's
good.
not bad at all. Yeah.
24 years ago. That's more concerning. That's more horrific to me, to be honest. Number 3, I Am Legend, starring Wiki Wild Wild West Will Smith.
That's
2007.
interesting. It's not as good as the book. The book is fantastic. I heartily recommend that to.
I would actually say the original 70s movie Omega Man is better than I Am Legend.
Yeah.
It's sort of. I think where it struggled as a horror film is it wants to be a zombie film, but in the book they are vampires, and it's almost a kind of precursor to the modern zombie in the book, which came out in the, I want to say 60s. I'm not sure, it might be even earlier than that. But it's the book was essentially the monsters were vampires, but it was trying to rationalise vampires as a scientific possibility. So
And the
they
Omega
had
Man sticks a lot closer to the book with it.
So they had a disease that makes them averse to sunlight and need to attack people to stay alive and that sort of thing. So it is the modern zombie film, but it's not zombies. And I think the film struggled to figure out whether it wanted to be a zombie film or stick close to the book.
Yeah.
And the ending of the book makes the title make more sense, and they completely change it in the film, so it doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, apparently at the time, because I've read into this, they shot 2 different endings.
Okay.
One was he stayed and the couple escaped, and the other one he escaped with the couple.
They'd both be different to the book.
Yes, both different to the book,
Yeah.
but one tested better with other audiences, of course.
I'd say it was more of a creature feature than a horror movie.
Yeah.
Okay, moving swiftly on. Number 4, World War Z. So this is from a horror book as such, written by Mel Brooks' son, I believe.
Max, yeah.
Would you say it's a horror film, or would you say it's a disaster movie using zombies as the natural disaster?
It's elements of it are kind of scary.
Yeah.
Again, it plays into the kind of things that I find creepy, this unrelenting force that just will not stop. So that kind of stuff creeps me out, more so than I Am Legend. I wouldn't have been, that didn't creep me out half as much. So again, we were veering into monster movies rather than horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think World War Z for me is more of a monster movie. Because it's got zombies.
It's just zombies, isn't it, really? It's just look, zombies are taking over.
I haven't actually seen it, to be honest, but the impression I get is, like you say, it's a
there was a lot of grumbling along at the time. The book was very much here is an actual proper story, whereas the other one was just Brad Pitt running around, jumping onto helicopters. It was very disappointing. Right, so number 5... It Part 2, or It Chapter 2 as it's called.
Yeah, if the first one's a horror movie, then the second one's going to be.
Yeah.
It drops down to 473 million after 701 million, so quite a lot of people didn't go back for the second time round.
Well, also changes the ending quite massively from the book, but this time for much better reasons.
Yes. What you don't mean, there's a spoilers, giant spider clown thing at the end is not the best way to finish the novel.
Yeah.
But yeah, so kind of covered that one already. So number 6, now we're the first film outside of the last 25 years. Any guesses?
Well, I would say it's probably going to be something like The Exorcist.
It is The Exorcist. $441 million gross back in 1973.
Yeah.
So it's in its 50th anniversary year this year.
I'd say so, of the films so far, this is probably the most horror one.
It's a classic horror film, isn't
Yeah.
it? You can't.
Yeah.
They kind of set the mould
Yeah.
for horror. Modern horror, anyway, at least.
Definitely.
So yeah.
And then the next one after that is number 7, Signs, which to me is not a horror film at all.
No.
No.
It's an alien invasion movie.
Yeah.
The horror probably is Mel Gibson. In hindsight, that's the horror of it now.
It does do quite a good job of using, I suppose, horror filmmaking conventions to make it feel creepy. Like again, you don't really see the aliens that much, and it's the fear of the unknown and the fear of something you can't control.
I think it definitely sits more in the sci-fi camp rather than horror.
It does have some of the horror tropes of some stuff being incredibly stupid. For example, what the weakness of the aliens is. But still.
Yes. So number 8, the first film in the Alien franchise. Well, it's not Alien. That's what I'm going to give you. Can you guess?
Prometheus?
It is Prometheus.
Really?
Yes, Prometheus is number 8, $403 million at the box office. And again, not a horror film.
No, very much a sci-fi.
Long-term listeners will already probably know my opinion on this. But it's not horror, and it's not great.
It's definitely more on the Aliens to Aliens sci-fi rather than the alien horror element.
The most horrific thing is the messing about with the whole idea of Alien in the first
No,
place.
the most horrific thing is running away from a big rolly spaceship and not moving to either the left or the right and then getting...
Yeah.
I can't believe that has grossed more in the box office than any of the previous Alien films. That's shocking.
So at number 9, it's the first appearance of the Conjuring universe. Well, it's not the Conjuring.
I imagine it. I would say this is probably going to be one of the Annabelle movies.
Yeah, I would guess.
Nope.
Anyway.
It is The Nun.
Really?
The Nun made $365.5 million at the box office.
Damn. People like nuns.
Yeah.
And then number 10, quite surprised by this one, Hannibal.
I wouldn't say Hannibal is a horror film.
It's a thriller movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a thriller movie. And number 11, we've discussed about this off air, A Quiet Place, which we agreed is more, it's a monster movie, but it's a horror film.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely in the sci-fi horror kind of element in terms of stuff. It has. I mean, this is the thing: is that when you've got horror tropes quite clearly being used in this kind of movie, there are a lot of moments in this movie where you are kind of like thinking, "Oh my god,"
holding your breath.
Yeah.
Try not to make any noise in the cinema. It's the quietest experience I've ever been watching a film.
You immediately hate anyone who makes like a rustle or a crunch or something. It's like, what are you doing? You're going to get them.
I think this is where it plays into the kind of horror idea, is that it is much more intense in an audience situation.
Oh, definitely.
Whereas if you watch it at home with the kettle going and somebody ringing the doorbell, it is not as scary in any way, shape or form. But
if you can pause
theatre,
then
you're right.
That's what I think is the problem with horror at home, is if you can pause it and walk away, then you're not having that experience with it.
yeah.
Next two films, I'm going to put them together, which is The Conjuring 2 and then The Conjuring. So $320 and $319 million at the box office each. So they made stacks of cash for what is quite cheap films to make, really.
Yeah. I think it's that. I think what you've got. The problem you've got with horror is that you've got subgenres. So like these would be paranormal films. So I think you've got horror is a massively nebulous thing under which you can have sci-fi horror, paranormal, slasher, whatever it is. So I guess they class as a horror movie.
Yeah. I mean, they all kind of descend from Paranormal Activity for me. It was kind of that first jump scary movie, which kind of itself was an evolving of Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
It was just very cheap to make, very quick to do. Yeah. Next one, Resident Evil: The Final Chapter.
Okay.
Now, is this just pure schlock with the Resident Evil name slapped over the top of it?
I can't say I've actually seen this one, so I can't comment.
I'm not sure I have, but after the first Resident Evil, they do slightly blend together for me. I guess it technically is horror because it's got zombies and gory stuff in, but...
I'm surprised it's in the top 20 though.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking of all the other horror movies that I've seen in my life.
Made $312 million at the box office.
That must have been an extremely good marketing campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So next one down, back to the Conjuring franchise again. They have made so much money out of this franchise. Annabelle Creation, $306 million.
I mean, yeah, dolls are creepy, especially big dolls that then try and kill you. So, yeah.
Next one along, and I take great umbrage at this one, Van Helsing, the 2004 film.
That's not a horror film. That's no more a horror film than the Brendan Fraser Mummy films are.
It is basically an adjacent movie to the Mummy films.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's basically the same guy doing the Mummy, but with Van Helsing. It was, shocking.
It's to me it was very much a schlock. It's classed as an action horror film by Stephen Sommers. So
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they put Kate Beckinsale in. It was like, if you're a fan of the underworld and vampires and werewolves,
And everybody loves Hugh Jackman.
well, this was at peak of his fame, wasn't it? So this would have been around just after, I think it was X-Men 2.
Sounds about right.
Sounds
Yeah.
right. I mean, it was a good hat.
Yeah.
So yeah, he had a good hat in that.
Yeah. So the next one down, Resident Evil Afterlife. which was, again, not a horror movie. It's a video game movie with some action and some kind of... I would actually say the first Resident Evil movie I would class as a horror film. It has some great horror elements in it, especially with like the corridor.
What they do to Colin Salmon is not nice.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, no, that stuck with me for a while after I first saw it. I do remember that.
But that is a horror film, but then they just descended into gun fu and kind of blasting zombies all around, and then,
I think the problem is with Resident Evil movies is you say the second half, so Resident Evil whatever it is, and I'm like, which one's that one? I can't remember. Yeah. It's like, I can't remember which, and if I come to watch them, I'm like, what's the order? Can we just, horror movie makers, can we just go back to the old thing of like, it's called 2 or 3, and then you put the subtitle on. So it's like Evil Dead 3. Red Evil Dead. Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn. Do the number, and then when I come to watch them, I can watch them in the right order.
And just as a supplement to that, working the number somewhere into the middle of the subtitle is not a valid compromise.
I mean,
forever.
Fant Four Stick is a horror film, but not in a way that they intended.
Expendables.
Cool. Number 18, A Quiet Place Part 2. Not seen, to be honest. I think the first one was a great little encapsulated story that didn't really need to make the sequel. I think it just made that much money. They were like, yeah, we're doing another one.
Yeah, probably, yeah. But it was fun.
It's not quite as tense.
No.
Because you kind of already know the general premise. So the idea of the noise thing isn't as intense anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's a solid enough movie.
It sort of becomes more of a kind of survival movie, doesn't it, rather than horror, because, like you say, you know what to expect from the monsters.
Yeah, it's definitely veering into Tremors territory type of thing.
Next one along, Split. So 3 M. Night Shyamalan movies in the top 20. And again, Split is a comic book movie. It is not a horror film to a certain extent.
So Split's the one with James McAvoy, isn't it? Not the... Yeah, Glass is the one that brings it all together.
Yeah, Glass is the one that brings...
So I'm more comfortable with Split being a horror film than some of the others that we've mentioned, because there are personalities of James McAvoy's character that are horror characters. Basically, they're horror tropes. He's filmed in a way that makes it tie in with any other horror films.
I'm now beginning to kind of come to the point of view, thinking of it as like horror is so massive a genre that you've got levels. So Split is definitely in the horror thing. For me, it's more psychological horror, the kind of like the creepiness of that. So it's not as horror based as something where it's maybe more gory. So like the Evil Dead kind of stuff is going to be kind of over here horror, and Split's kind of maybe kind of towards the other end. Whereas like, I'd be more comfortable encountering James McAvoy's character in the real world and not being freaked out beyond all belief against the Evil Dead side of things, where I'd be like, this is not going to end well. So I think for me horror is the kind of like, I get from the bits where I go, I could survive that, to the no chance. And the more towards the no chance it is, the more horrified I'm going to be.
But so movie number 20. Now this is kind of a bit of a robber, snake eating its own tail. Number 20 is Scary Movie.
Oh dear.
Is that a horror film?
No. It's not scary.
It's a comedy horror film.
Yeah. It's a comedy.
It is definitely a comedy.
Yeah.
Well, I say definitely. It's definitely intending to be a comedy.
The Scary Movies were definitely 100% comedies. I would say this one has some elements which make it more horrific. Slightly close to the bone.
Well, I'm just shocked at the idea that this is the 20th highest grossing horror movie in history.
So I'm going to go through, I'm going to pick out some from the rest of the top 50 list which you'd expect to be higher. So Scary Movie made $278 million at the box office. But 22, Halloween, which was Silence of the Lambs was above that. 26 was Us. 27 was Get Out. 28 was The Blair Witch Project, which made less money than Scary Movie, which is weird to think.
The weirdest thing for me is Scary Movie making more money than Scream.
Yeah, I'm surprised that none of the Scream movies are in the top 20. Yeah. Because I remember that being a massive thing. I mean, at least the first one was a huge kind of like people really were all over that as being a return to that kind of Halloween-esque scares.
And for exactly that reason, Scream 2 should be really high up as well, because people went to see it after Scream 1.
And it's been parodied and memed so many times as well.
I can't actually even see it in the list, to be honest.
Is Wikipedia just not counting Scream as a horror film?
That's what I'm thinking, which is very disturbing if you think about it, because they have franchises as a separate list, so it may be in there. We'll come to those in a bit. But other ones, Dark Shadows.
The Johnny Depp. Yep. I mean, that's based on a TV show. It's horror adjacent, but it's kind of like that. I mean, Dark Shadows it's the Addams Family or the Munsters.
Yeah.
You know, would you say the Addams Family and the Munsters were horror movies?
Yeah.
Because, you know.
At 29 is The Ring, which is the first kind of Japanese horror film, even though this is the American remake, which is actually.
I mean, to be honest, it's not a bad remake.
Yeah.
It's kind of okay.
35, Interview with a Vampire. 38, Bram Stoker's Dracula.
I do have to say, I do love Bram Stoker's Dracula.
It's Gary Oldman.
It's
Gary Oldman in a pop
Carfax Abbey, and it's got my dude Keanu in it as well, so that's kind of cool.
41, Sleepy Hollow. 39 was Jaws 2, actually, which is above Jaws, weirdly. Paranormal Activity at 44. 45, Hollow Man, which is a great horror sci-fi movie.
I think the thing you've got with this is this is not a list of the best horror movies.
No.
This is just a list of the ones that people were stupid enough to give money to, and then realise no, this is not very good.
So 49 and 50 were Alien and Aliens.
Okay.
But yeah, so if we think about biggest franchises, the Conjuring universe, of course. Then it's Alien. Then it's Resident Evil. Then it's It. Then it's the Saw franchise. Then Hannibal. Dracula, not really counting. Scream only made $173 million.
Across all six?
No, on the first one.
On the first one, okay.
It's made $913 million across all of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, and Scary Movie was not far behind on $896 million if you count all those together.
I'm glad at least the franchise Scream is better than doing better than franchise Scary Movie.
Paranormal Activity has made more than the Halloween franchise combined.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this as well, though, is it skewed for inflation? Like a lot of the Halloween films came out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it as well is the way these films were marketed.
Yeah.
You know, they got people into cinemas because of the way they marketed it. I mean, you know.
It's worth mentioning as well, people are going to see things like Paranormal Activity and Scream and the rest of it because of how good Halloween and Friday the 13th were. Like,
it's quite surprising Nightmare on Elm Street is really far down the list, even behind A Quiet Place on Grossbox.
Again, though, I think just purely on box office, I'm not that surprised by that, just because of when it came out.
I think there's any big major stuff that you would have expected to be in there, which isn't. I mean, Predator I expected to be in there. It's kind of, I'd say that was a horror sci-fi movie.
I'd say Predator's more of a horror film than Jaws is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would have liked. I know it didn't do well when it was released, so I'd have liked The Thing to have been up there, in there. But this is the problem with a lot of what I would consider my favourite horror movies is they were pretty low budget, small release stuff that I only ever saw on video or TV later on. So I know they're never going to have made, you know, massive box office impressions. So I would assume most of the films that I would go to as my, you know, when I put my pile of Blu-rays and DVDs to watch over Halloween, most of them won't be in the top 20 horror movies.
Well, I was expecting a lot more Stephen King franchise stuff in there.
But mostly Stephen King stuff is terrible. Really, there's not a lot of great Stephen King adaptations.
They're either incredibly good or incredibly bad. Some of the highest grossing,
the more recent Pet Cemeteries, I thought they might be in there with a shout. I mean, it is in there, of course, but
yeah. But I've always kind of like, I've never been a huge fan of The Shining as a horror movie. It's
But again,
it's not very scary.
Reasonable, wasn't it? What's his face?
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Death, was it? Not Dr. Death.
Dr. Sleep.
Dr. Sleep,
Yeah. That one, I think actually, I prefer that one to The Shining. I have got both, and I have shown other people. I've shown people who've never watched The Shining. I've shown them The Shining and told them, like, you know, this is supposedly one of the greatest horror films I've ever. And most people are like, God, that was terrible.
But yeah, I expect a lot more Japanese stuff to be in there. I expected quite a lot of other
But again, if we're talking about box office figures,
US based. Yes.
They're just not going to pick that up.
No.
So yeah, I mean, this is the problem with being geeky. We will see things that major audiences won't see.
Yeah.
And so we'll always have a frame of reference that will be far broader.
Mm-hmm.
You know, given the choice, people are going to, because it's marketed well, people are going to go and see the Conjurings or the Annabelles or the Nuns because it's prominent and it's easy to find, and it's people are just like, well, that's on, I'll go and see that.
I suppose the Conjuring universe especially has had one of those, you've seen the last 5, so you're going to want to go and carry on watching it and see the whole thing come together at the end.
Yeah.
Do you think that they'll have like the Conjuring Endgame, where like the Nun and Annabelle will like join enough make like a super monster team?
If we had Freddy versus Jason, Annabelle versus the Nun in space can only be on the horizon.
It's time for our regular feature, One Geek Thing. And Sam, we'll start off with you first.
Okay. Well, in the spirit of the Halloween episode, I realise I'm very, very late to this, but I've recently just finished watching the Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, which is fantastic. It's a very good horror film anyway, horror series rather. We were saying before about franchises being a bit kind of schlocky and either sort of doing jump scares and violence and stuff just for the sake of it, or the more sort of original ones will try and do something original. I loved Hill House because it's just a good ghost story, essentially. It's not trying to sort of say too much. There is stuff there if you want to read into it, but it's not bashing you over the head with anything. The thing I love most about it, though, is the kind of background ghosts, which I'm sure, again, everyone who's already seen it is probably well aware of this. But for anyone who hasn't, there's obviously the main kind of cast of ghosts who feature in the plot, and you kind of get bits and pieces of their backstory told to you by various characters over the course of the series. But then there's also just hidden ghosts in the background that they don't draw any attention to them. But once you know that they're there, you start looking out for them. And I think that's the genius of the series, because you spend the whole show desperately peering into every little corner and dark window and everything, trying to see if there's a face there or a hand or something like that. And then when the show finishes and you turn Netflix off and turn around into your house, you're subconsciously still doing it. And it's a genuinely creepy thing. You sort of go to bed afterwards and you're like, no, that's not there.
That's the genius of that kind of thing. It's like I was saying before, it's something you can take back to you. So if you're looking at a wardrobe or something and you're looking at the swirls in the wood and you're going, there's a face there.
Yeah.
That's where the kind of horror really works, is you can see it, or there's the twist of a shadow, and you just go, did that move? Is that something?
This is going to sound really bad now, but it makes it sound like this is just a Halloween version of Where's Wally? He's got the bobble hat on. He's there.
I'm not sure whether he continued it into the kind of the series that follows, because it's the Haunting of Blythe House, which I kind of liked, apart from the fact that it was like, this man has quite clearly never been to England, because basically every scene that's set outside of this Blythe House in England, the soundtrack is cicadas going, and you just go, England is not like this. It does not sound like part of America. So I don't know if they did it in that, and I don't know if they did it in the Midnight Mass, which I think was the next one. And then I can't remember what the one in between was, because we've just come to the Fall of a House of Usher. So this is the last one that he does before he moves to. I think he's moving to Amazon. In terms of that, so the Fall of the House of Usher one is basically all the episodes are named after Edgar Allan Poe stories. But I haven't looked up to see. I must. If I feel like I've missed out, if he's been doing it in the previous series since,
I think
I've not looked.
I'm basing this purely on the fact that I googled the ghosts that you may have missed in Hill House afterwards, and I think I remember seeing some similar sorts of articles for the Blythe Manor one.
Okay.
I don't know about the rest of them.
I need to look those up because I've forgotten all about that.
I always thought the whole point of a ghost was it was attached to the place and it died. So how would that work if they're like moving to a different house, like from Blythe House to
different ghosts, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's more of a.
It's more the repertoire of actors that he uses. So he tends to use it's Mike Flanagan, I believe, is the creator of the shows. Yeah. So he uses the same repertoire of actors. So in Fall of the House of Usher, he's brought Mark Hamill in, which sounds quite good. So I haven't watched that one yet, so I'm a bit behind myself. But Halloween's coming up, so I've got time.
Again, House of Usher just makes me think of a certain rapper from the 2000s.
Yeah.
That's all I can think when you say it.
They're wandering through the house, and then just in the background you hear, yeah.
That's scary.
That is
So
pretty
all I was
scary.
thinking was kind of like, the Ryan Murphy series where he's just like American Horror Story, but he's also done like the House of Gucci. Not the House of Gucci, was it Donatella Versace? Did the House of Versace, was it?
Oh, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. So this just sounds like this is like a blend over that he's making his own kind of alternative one with like rapping ghosts in this House of Usher.
I think I've seen that movie.
Yeah, maybe Tupac will pop up in it. We don't know.
I'm looking forward to House of Snoop Dogg.
That would be a great one because you would not know if it was just Snoop Dogg being high or if it was actually happening.
They walk into the house and there's lots of atmospheric mist floating around.
I'm not sure. I may be Mandela-ing affecting this, but I'm sure there's been a rise of kid-friendly scare movies over the past few years. And
Wasn't
one
Disney just done the Haunted Mansion movie?
The Haunted Mansion, which looks more scary than the Eddie Murphy Haunted Mansion. So he was one with the dude from
Stranger Things. It was the sheriff. I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
And he plays a ghost in a house who can't talk. And I'm fairly convinced that Snoop Dogg turns up as a ghost in that. I might be wrong, or he's in the Muppet Haunted Mansion, but I'm fairly certain somewhere in his career Snoop has been a ghost in something.
He was in a vampire film on Netflix, I want to say.
Has he been in
not long ago.
Yeah. I'm just convinced somewhere that he's done this in the past. I mean, he's done pretty much everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just walks around. That's dope. But yeah, so Haunted on Hill House, would you recommend it on Netflix?
Very much
The
so,
rest
yes.
of the other ones?
I still need to see the rest of it, but I'm definitely going to be watching them over Halloween.
Mm. Keith, am I going to guess this is about an ensemble cast of ghosts in a house somewhere, but on BBC, not Netflix?
No, strangely enough, it's not, because I've mentioned this recently already. But I'm going to go for something else, which has had a long-standing history in my life that I don't think enough people have seen. Because it originally started out on Virgin as an on-demand show. It had been on an American channel somewhere else, but it was on Virgin, so you couldn't watch it on a regular channel service. You could only watch it on the Virgin on-demand. Mm-hmm. Then it disappeared for ages, and has recently, in the last few years, turned up on Netflix. I still think it's one of the best horror TV shows that I've seen in years, and of course it is Ash vs Evil Dead. Runs for 3 seasons. Brings back Bruce Campbell as Ash Williams, who, for me, is Evil Dead. Beyond the Necronomicon, beyond the Deadites. If it's not got Ash Williams in, it's not the Evil Dead. He's so quintessential to that series. And this kind of continues his story of being the not hero. Ash Williams he's had enough. I do not want to have anything to do with this. Do not bring this book near me. Do not bring Deadites near me. I've not had anything to do with it. And it's a series that works brilliantly. It introduces newer characters who are phenomenal. They have their own arcs. Lucy Lawless turns up in it as a Deadite advocate. And it also features, which I will not spoil, the greatest bit of casting I've ever seen in my life outside of a Marvel movie. And if you are a person of a certain age, you will definitely appreciate the actor they cast as Ash Williams' dad. I won't spoil it. You need to see it in the show. I didn't know that this was going to happen when I watched it, and I went, that is the greatest bit of casting I've ever seen in my life. And if you see it and you know who it is, it's wonderful. And it's funny, it's full of blood, it's gory, it's quite creepy. In parts you kind of go, this is kind of scary. You know, it's end of the world apocalyptic stuff. And unfortunately ends with the third series with Ash propelled into a post-apocalyptic future that promised so much in a fourth series, with him basically driving around as Mad Max in a Deadite-infested zombie apocalypse world, which, where we currently are in history, doesn't seem that improbable. But it's brilliant, and I loved it, and I loved it that it continued the mythos of the original Evil Dead series, and just played to its strengths, knew exactly what it was, and did it brilliantly. And I don't think enough people have seen it.
I think it was on something like Stars Network in the States.
It was some random network, yeah, and it disappeared for a while in the UK. But I think it's currently on Netflix at the moment. So if you have time, it's 3 seasons. I think they're kind of 10 to 13 episodes in length.
Half seasons for for an American kind of run.
But you could squeeze them in before Halloween, and they're definitely worth it. There is gallons and gallons of blood in this, and they do luxuriate in covering their actors in as much blood as possible. But it's a great series. Fits completely within the first 3 Evil Dead movies, and is much more, for me, a continuation of that franchise than the reboot or the Evil Dead Rise. So I wholeheartedly recommend Ash versus Evil Dead.
So would you class Bubba Hotep as part of the Evil Dead franchise?
No, but that film is completely unavailable in the UK anyway, and that is a crime against great movies, because Ossie Davis and Bruce Campbell play brilliantly in that film, and the fact that you can't stream it or buy it on any service at the moment is just shocking. I mean, luckily I've got it on an imported American DVD. But yeah, any channel out there that should be, you should be ashamed of yourself if you've not got Bubba Hotep on, because that's also brilliant. But again, it's the
Bruce Campbell.
Bruce Campbell. Yeah. So what about you, Ryan? What's your horrifically One Geek Thing?
So I'm going to go back to a movie which I've been trying to convince Keith for years is a horror movie, which is 1979's Disney movie, The Black Hole, which has very many great horror elements. First, it's got Anthony Perkins in it, who is Psycho, one of the greatest horror films, which thriller horror films, I would say. Psychological horror films. It has a cast of zombies wandering around. It has the wonderful Maximilian Schell, who is the best kind of horror villain, of just camping around in his giant gothic cathedral spaceship.
He's a mad scientist, isn't he?
He's a mad scientist, which, again, back to classic horror, Frankenstein. We have Maximilian, the killer robot, which is unstoppable, which, again, many horror tropes in that one. And we have our small cast of humans wandering around this gothic spaceship trying to escape. It's a horror film. Just because it's got Disney on it.
No, I mean, I won't disagree with you that it is scary, and it has got nice visuals. The Maximilian on top of the thing with the red background, very Hieronymus.
Well, when it ends in literal hell at the end of the film. I mean, there could be any more horrific thing than being trapped inside their horrible robot and Maximilian Schell's outcome in the series.
It's a great movie. There's a bit of wooden acting in it that kind of lets it down a little bit. But again, that's part of the joy of a horror movie, that not everybody's up to the standards they should.
But the reason I was reminded of this film is because Prop Store, if you don't know, auction house in London. They sell a lot of movie memorabilia and merchandise. They've currently got a sci-fi and fantasy sale going on at the moment. I think Anthony Daniels is offloading his entire C-3PO collection, so I think you can buy like one of C-3PO's original heads. There's loads of Star Wars stuff. There's even, I was looking through this earlier, there's a couple of Battlestar Galactica test pilot models in there. There's Batman cowls, etc. There's the light up clock from Back to the Future Part 3 from the car. So lots and lots of props if you want them. But the reason I was reminded of it, because they are selling 3 lots from the black hole. The first one is Vincent, who is the filming miniature. That one is currently valued at $30,000 to $60,000 and the starting bid of $15,000. Next one is Bob, who's the maintenance robot, voiced by Slim Pickens, I believe. Is it in the film?
Now you've got me. 'Cause I know who Vincent's voice is.
Yeah.
But I can't remember who does Bob. That's I feel shocked that I can't remember that.
We'll put it on the screen now.
Yeah.
But yeah, another filming miniature, so you can buy Bob. He's also £30,000 to £60,000 with a starting bid of £15,000. But the one that I would really like is a maquette of Maximilian. And this one's slightly more reasonable. It only starts at £10,000.
Really?
Value between £10,000 to £20,000, starting at £5,000.
Oh, well, you could snap that up. Quite
So I
easily.
think if we all put together as a group, we could buy a Maximilian maquette and replace our Maximilian figure of here with the actual maquette from the film.
Yeah. I mean, I also love John Barry's score.
Oh, amazing score.
Pretty awesome.
And I think it got reused quite a lot, that score, in other stuff afterwards.
A couple of times, but yeah, it's a great.
But yeah, I keep looking at it, I'm like, can I justify £10,000 on a maquette robot in the corner of the room?
It's an investment.
Yeah. I mean, you could also buy a Captain Blue Super Mario Nation puppet head for £4,000. That's actually got one bid on it at the moment. But yeah, some of the stuff I've been looking at in this auction, it is crazy priced. So if I find the highest value item, 2 seconds. Highest value item is currently Star Wars A New Hope 1977 Anthony Daniels Collection Screen Match Light Up C-3PO Head.
Yes.
So the estimate is £500,000 to £1 million.
Whoa.
The starting bid is £250,000. How much do you think the first bid has gone in at?
Ooh. Is somebody lowballing it? Or is it 400,000?
Close. Sam, do you want to have a guess?
500,000.
450,000. So slap
Between us, yeah.
to you. So that's the most expensive item there. But yeah, a C-3PO head, probably signed by Anthony Daniels, I assume.
I would definitely get my arse kicked if I bought a £500,000 CCP into the house.
But coming full circle, the lowest value item is a trailer reel from Freddy vs. Jason 2003.
50p.
Starting bid is between estimates between £50 and £100. The starting bid is £25. It has received one bid. Where do we think it is?
Where's the bid come from? I don't understand what you're asking.
It's currently got an absentee bid for £50. So if you wanted to buy yourself Freddy vs. Jason 2003 Mario Kart Collection trailer reel, spend more than £50 and you can have that in your collection.
What are you going to do with it?
I don't know. It's a trailer reel, so you need to have a 35mm projector to put it on.
You were talking about the black hole, have they not got the spaceships?
They've
Because
not got the spaceships.
I would quite like the Palomino and the Cygnus. That
No.
would be, because that cathedral in space spaceship is
It's
pretty
absolutely
flipping
beautiful. Yeah, I'm assuming they trashed it when they put that hot marble through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff on there, some quite reasonable stuff. So if you wanted an autographed DVD of Lord of the Rings from 1978, signed by Anthony Daniels, that's currently £100 if you wanted to get the original rotoscoped version.
See, I want my spaceships. I'd want like an Enterprise or an X-Wing or a Viper or something. I kind of want one of those. rather than anything else.
You
I
can
don't
get a
think-
cloning of
I
Viper.
don't think I'm that interested in something that's had Anthony Daniels' hot crotch in it. I mean, I imagine there's a market for it, but
Yeah.
I don't think I can put it on display anyway.
But last item, talking of horror, we'll finish off on this one. Nightmare on Elm Street / Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, Freddy Krueger Scream Matched Glove.
When you say screen matched glove, that doesn't sound like it's screen used.
Screen match usually means that they've compared it to what it looks like on camera, and it is confirmed to be that this is an authentic article,
Okay.
not a repro, basically.
I mean, it'd be all right for slicing up your onions and stuff, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So, what estimate do we think on this one
For the glove,
for the glove? Just Freddy Krueger's glove, no rest of the costume.
I reckon you've got to be in the 125s area.
At least I would say, yeah, maybe more like 200,000.
Estimated at 200 to 400,000 pounds,
Wow.
and it has got one bid on it at the moment, which is its starting bid of 100,000 pounds.
I mean, if you're going to buy some memorabilia from Nightmare on Elm Street, you want the
It's
glove.
glove and the hat,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the jumper.
Yeah.
And one more thing, just for you, Keith. Aliens light up remote controlled photo match 1/12 scale APC miniature model. Starting bid on that one is 150,000 pounds.
You said remote controlled.
Yep,
So you could drive this around on
Yeah.
your floor. Oh, yeah, I'm going for that.
150 grand.
Okay.
Indiana Jones bullwhip, 50 grand.
Do you think that's like a check?
Right, I'm going to stop because we've been doing this game for days. Thank you for joining us on the Geeky Brummie Show this issue. Keith, where can we find you online?
You can find me on X, Leigh, Twitter, at hardluck_hotel, and then pretty much everywhere else as Hardluck Hotel. But particularly go and find me on Blue Sky now, because that's kind of like Twitter, like it used to be. So definitely find me over there. But if you just Google Hardluck Hotel and it's not anything to do with Count Duckula, it's probably me.
Sam, how about yourself?
You can find me on Twitter at DragonSam89. I'm not calling it X still. And on Instagram at SDEdwards89.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the inshitification continues at Twitter. You can find me at Ryan Parish on Twitter and Blue Sky, and you can find us all at Geeky Brummie on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Got to get the Blue Sky set up, but YouTube or your podcasting service of choice, which is why you're either watching or hearing this. So while you're here, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, do all the terrible stuff that everybody asks you to do. But otherwise, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to check out geekybrummie.com for the comics roundup every Wednesday and the gaming roundup most Fridays. Well, we shall see you again soon. But for now, goodbye, everybody.